Last weekend in Minneapolis, there was an absolutely preposterous scene where a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters was heckling a neighborhood mom who was upset with the crowd because they were honoring a man who, just a few days prior, she said had fired multiple rounds into her apartment where she lives with her young children. The mob told her to shut up because, after all, she's still alive, and her attacker isn't because he was killed by police.
This is not okay!
You're alive!
Shut up! You guys need to just let it go! Grief in silence! My kids have to deal with this and probably have a mental illness now because they almost lost their life. There's bullet holes in my kitchen because he sat in the fucking hallway watching my move.
Not in you, though. Right. So apparently you have to wait until after a criminal puts bullet holes in you to be justified in condemning him, or for police to be justified in stopping him. You can only say he's a bad guy after he kills you. Until then, his abuse and his threats and his gunfire at you are all fair. And if only dead people have this expired right to speak, if you're alive means shut up, then why does the mob have a right to speak? They are also alive, so shouldn't they too just be thankful for that and shut up and go home? There's no point in searching for the logic, though. Of course, after all, the protesters say that mom is just having a moment.
She's obviously going through a moment.
This is not okay!
As though just a little bit of emotion in response to a public celebration and honoring of a man who just tried to kill you in front of your kids is inappropriate, much less outside of your own home. And as though these protesters aren't having a wildly emotional moment themselves. Emotional irrationality is all that they have, to the point that they're out mourning the loss of an attempted murderer rather than celebrating the survival of the mom and kids he tried to kill. But to give this mob whatever break they don't deserve, at that point, the full facts in this case had not yet been demonstrated. We had mom's story about what happened. We had the police story about what happened, both of which said this was a case of an attacker shooting rounds into this woman's apartment, police confronting that attacker then barricading himself inside his own apartment for hours until he threatened police and police snipers took him out. We didn't have observable evidence of that story yet. That story was all that we had. But now we do have observable evidence of it. In response to this misguided public outrage, the city of Minneapolis has released multiple perspectives of body cam footage of the event, and the event was exactly as it was described, proving exactly who was actually having a moment and exactly who should have shut up the whole time. At about 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday, July 13th, the woman we saw yelling at the protesters, Arabella Yarbrough, called 911 saying shots had just been fired into her apartment. She said she was making dinner for her 2 young boys in the kitchen, and the gunfire had nearly hit her. She has photos to demonstrate, and of course it's not that even one is justified, but this was not just one shot, like an accidental discharge or something. It is several rounds piercing several rooms of her apartment. Those shots came from neighbor Andrew Sundberg, who went by the nickname Tekle. Yarbrough says Sundberg has had episodes of stalking her in the past. They've had awkward or hostile encounters around the apartment building. In this case, she believes he waited until he could hear her running water at her kitchen sink before shooting into her apartment from the hallway. Police responded to that 911 call within about 10 minutes. Upon approach to the apartment, the responding officer took gunfire from Sundberg through the door to the stairwell.
Police department. Shots fired, shots fired.
It may be hard to see at first just how close that first round was, but it punched right through the door, as did several more soon thereafter. That first officer was not hit or hurt. Backup arrived for that officer in under a minute, and police successfully extracted Yarbrough and her young children. And it sounds like Sundberg fired at least one more shot in that process. I say sounds like because there's some dispute about whether that shot was Sundberg shooting or police shooting back at him. I think it's Sundberg shooting because, one, Yarbrough says he's shooting, referring to Sundberg.
Shots fired, active shooter in
And 2, police then described where that shot came from.
It's right there. The bullet came through there.
At this point, Sundberg retreated to his own apartment, and police kept him contained there. A SWAT team and negotiators then arrived, and later in the night, Sundberg's parents arrived as well. And then for 6 hours, Sundberg remained in his apartment. Door barricaded, drapes pulled. Police used non-lethal rounds to break his windows to try to establish a clearer view into his apartment. After unsuccessful negotiation attempts, at 4 a.m., police started organizing a plan to force him out with gas. But then Sundberg appeared in the window, apparently talking to someone unknown on the phone or perhaps talking to himself. Police say at that point, Sundberg threatened to shoot them. It's almost impossible to understand exactly what he's saying on the body cam footage, but there are a few moments that sound like something close to that effect.
Make you order him for it. If he doesn't, you will get yourself shot in front of him. You didn't even have the respect to shoot you behind. No, we would have shot you just because he thought you were you.
109, he's threatening to shoot the officers, and he's breaking up some of his windows.
Less than a minute later, a police sniper team posted on top of a neighboring apartment building reported that they saw Sundberg emerging with a gun, and they took him out with 2 rifle shots.
Gun.
On that point of emerging with a gun, a witness says he heard police command Sundberg to drop it immediately before the shots. That witness doesn't say that he saw the gun, just that he heard police issue an order about it. Sundberg was then rushed to the hospital where he died. So we never actually see Sundberg's gun in the body cam footage, but to believe that he didn't have it at the time of these shots requires us to ignore a lot of things. We'd have to ignore his established aggressive shooting in the hours prior. We'd have to ignore what sounds like threatening language and believe that police just made all of that up. We'd have to ignore the witness who heard police command Sundberg to drop it before the shots. We'd have to believe those police snipers just made up seeing the gun, both of them. And we'd have to ignore the 6 hours of attempted negotiation and asking politely. If police went to this scene with the intent to kill, they could have been home much earlier in the night. But all of those things are exactly what these activists do expect us to believe, that this was all some plot to get this guy, even though he could have just walked out of this plot any time alive for 6 hours. And even though he himself had acted out a lethal plot against others that initiated the entire event. Sundberg's parents have been pushing a lot of these claims, and of course, I can sympathize with anybody who loses a son, even if the circumstances are completely justified. That's very difficult for any parent, but it does not entitle the ridiculous public blame of others, which is exactly what these parents are doing. Sundberg's parents, Mark and Cindy, are white. They adopted Sundberg from Ethiopia when he was 4 years old. They have a large family of biological and adopted children, and they're saying, yes, this only happened because Tekle Sundberg was black.
Everyone knows, had it been a white person in that building, they would have talked him out. They would have waited. People who go in and shoot massive amounts of people are arrested safely and alive if they're white. If they're not white, we know the outcome. They're dead. They're dead. It's all about color. It's all about the lack of value of the humanity of a black body. And it's wrong.
The guy shot at black bodies, those little kids. If the value of black bodies is paramount, why didn't mom and dad teach him that lesson? And the police did talk it out. They did wait. They just didn't wait for a trigger to be pulled against them. The distinguishing factor is not race. The distinguishing factor is no surrender and a continued threat against others. And if you think that a white person could get away with such actions unscathed, go ahead and prove it to us. Do the white reenactment and see what happens. See if you can beat the 6-hour survival record. About protesting outside the apartment of the surviving mom and kids, Sundberg's parents give ridiculous explanations. Sundberg's mom says she wasn't aware that the woman her son victimized still lives there.
She lived here. This is her space.
known that she was still living here, we would never, ever, we did not know any of this. We would not ever have subjected her to this.
Okay, that video was taken 3 days after her son's attack on that woman. Her apartment was still a crime scene. She couldn't even go get her stuff, let alone move out in that time frame. So obviously she still lives there. But even if she wasn't present at the time, how does that justify mourning the death of an attempted murderer over respecting the surviving family? Oh, well, those are separate instances, says Dad Mark. Those are completely different things.
My heart goes out for that woman. She went through a very traumatic event with those bullets coming through her house. It is two different incidences. It's the shots going through her house, and what we're here for is when Tekle was shot by the Minneapolis police.
One is a direct result of the other. He attacked people, and so he was shot. They're connected not just by cause, but by justification. His ongoing attacks on others justify taking him out. This is no more sensible than comforting a drunk driving victim by saying, hey, at least the party beforehand was lit. It was a completely separate instance. I'm sorry it didn't work out for you. Sundberg's parents claim police blocked them from speaking with their son during negotiations.
I asked every police officer that approached me if I could go talk to him. No, absolutely not.
That is not true, as demonstrated by video of Mark speaking with his son over a loudspeaker several times that night. And Dad urged his son to speak with negotiators, not him. He wasn't blocked by police. He directed his son's attention to them.
Tekle, this is your dad again. I need you to talk to the negotiators. They just want to talk to you right now, okay? Give them 30 seconds. Tekle, this is your dad again. Please talk to the negotiators.
And even if that didn't happen, was Dad banned from calling his son? Or banned from texting his son? There was hours worth of attempted communication of various forms that night. It's just that, like a lot of things, his son chose not to comply with it. Well, that is because of mental health. That's another explanation the parents are going with to deflect responsibility. This wasn't a standoff, it was a mental health episode, says Sundberg's sister. And a mental health episode is not a death sentence. Well, it wasn't. Pointing and shooting guns was. And if this is a mental health issue, then what was his diagnosis? It's not mentioned anywhere, as far as I can tell. And if the family knew that he had mental health problems, then why didn't they intervene with his social media gun brandishing? If he was diagnosed mentally ill, then how did he get these guns anyway? He'd be a prohibited person. And by the way, he was 20 years old, meaning he's generally prohibited from purchasing a handgun by federal law. So again, how did he get these guns anyway? How did those closest to him miss these repeated and glaring warning signs? That is what the mom who Sundberg attacked is asking. It sure looks like you protesters just show up to posture on the body of somebody you didn't even know and didn't care to know while he was alive. Is this really about justice, or is it just about political points?
And none of these people checked on that man to see if he was okay. If he had a mental illness, where was the love and support when he was alive? He sat in that apartment every day by himself. For 3 years I lived here, and none of you guys knocked on that man's door to see if he was okay. Not at all. Y'all should have came and helped him when he was alive.
And if Sundberg had successfully killed those kids, or successfully killed mom and orphaned them, would any of these protesters be out on this same street demanding justice for those Black lives? It's a counterfactual, it's speculation, of course, but in a fair point for mom, I think the answer is likely no.
I'm licensed to carry. No. If I would have shot him back, would I have been a suspect? Would you guys hear from my side? Would you even care?
You asked on your social media, you said if you died, would we care, would we rally?
No, you wouldn't. Not like this. No, the fuck you wouldn't have. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't even know the story.
If there's any consolation in this nonsense, at least the general public isn't villainizing the victim in the way that the activist mob is. A GoFundMe for this woman and her sons has now raised over $70,000, though it was originally outpaced by a GoFundMe for Sundberg's funeral expenses. This after GoFundMe banned the account for the legal fund of Jose Alba recently. Of course, the New York shop worker who defended himself from a convict attacker and is now free of charges. GoFundMe banned him, saying they don't allow support for violent criminals, of which Sundberg somehow does not qualify. On video defending yourself from a criminal, you're banned. On video aggressively shooting at a mom, her children, and police, well, you can raise all the funds you want for the most extravagant hero's funeral this town has seen since George Floyd. And I can't help but notice, Mom, that differential treatment is not explained by whiteness. In fact, I think this story demonstrates the exact opposite. You can open fire on an innocent mom and her kids. You can open fire on police and then just go home and turn on your music and chill out for a couple hours while the police ask you with completely undeserved politeness to please just come out and have a talk about it.
Come on outside. Come out your apartment with your hands up.
I don't care.
Mr. Sundberg, we need you to come out and cooperate with us. We don't want to hurt you. We just want to go home.
You can point a gun and pull the trigger at several innocent people throughout and still receive a hero's honor in the form of both public praise and cash compensation, so long as your skin is the correct complexion. It is only to the activists that all other things are indeed secondary, up to and including the attempted cold-blooded murder of kids. And I'm sorry, but I don't think a family who couldn't teach their son that lesson has any business lecturing the rest of us about what exactly we need to learn. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Parler. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.